This is a production of Cornell University.
Thanks very much. Very nice to see you all here. So I need to go back to my first slide. So I'm going to talk to you about a perhaps more commonplace vegetable than what you heard about, and how it fits in the food revolution. And that is broccoli. And if I can get this guy to go. So there is a revolution in the food system when it comes to vegetables. There's a revolutionary rise in consumption that you may not even be aware of. So this is a graph of how much broccoli people eat in a year in America. And it may surprise you that sometime early in your lifetime, people in America did not eat broccoli pretty much. It wasn't very well known at all. And there's been a pretty much continuous rise since about 1970, partly as a result of introduction of some high-quality hybrid broccoli varieties in the 1960s. And so the production was able to rise. And broccoli is actually one of the most consumed of the cooked green vegetables. So the biggies are tomatoes and potatoes. In other words, pizza and French fries, right? So when we're talking about public health and increasing vegetable consumption with that public health goal, so the pizza and fries are probably not the ones we want to be leading with. Broccoli is one that's sort of a symbol of a healthy food. So there's a revolution going on in the consumption. And we're working on a revolution in where that is happening. So this is a graph or a diagram that shows where broccoli is currently produced. So orange is summertime, blue is wintertime. And you can see right away, there's some big blobs in California. That is where the broccoli comes from, in the desert in the wintertime and on the cold Pacific coast where the fog comes in at night and makes the broccoli happy. In the summertime, it is possible to grow in the east, as long as you're in the northernmost, coldest county in the east. And it is possible to grow in the winter if you are in a particular spot in the sheltered Atlantic coast of Florida, not too far north or too far south. So there's a couple of spots where it has been working. But if we're going to really increase the production across the country, increase the availability for people who want local, and there is a considerable demand for local in the east. And also, if we want to think about just food security in the country. So last year in California, it was very dry, as you probably heard. And in those coastal counties where they were irrigating the broccoli from wells, they depleted the water table so far down that the Pacific Ocean started moving in underneath some of the best farmland in the country. So that's not a good thing. That puts us at risk to be dependent on creating that sort of problem. So distributing the production across the country is good, not only to meet the local demand, the environmental benefits of that, but really to make sure that we have a secure supply of some of these vegetables that are critical to our health. So the challenge with moving the broccoli over, since you see it's pretty polarized on the East Coast, is that we're trying to make it grow in a place that it really doesn't want to. In the summertime in the East, it's warm and humid at night, and the broccoli depends on cool temperatures to become broccoli. And what we see in the marketplace, very specific parts of what's actually a continuum in nature. And so these are some very closely related genotypes at what we'd call harvest maturity, and you probably recognize the first one. So that's a familiar market class. This is actually sold as a product in Britain and Italy. This one's called purple cauliflower. This one you pretty much can't buy. That, again, you recognize as the typical supermarket broccoli, and this is sort of a Chinese kale. So what's happening here is the flower buds are getting bigger at maturity. And there's a huge range of what's possible, and we only like those two in the US marketplace. It has to hit exactly that. And so the problem is when we move a California variety to the East Coast and grow it during the growing season, it doesn't know what to do. It produces this. You're not going to buy that. And even the varieties that were developed for the summertime produce this. And you're still not going to buy that. You're not going to have the opportunity to buy that. So this is where we think about how to develop broccoli that meets the consumer demand. And so what can we do to identify the consumer demand? So I'll start with that part that you might say, well, you know, it's local. People will accept that. It's okay if it's local. The weird look, it tastes fine, you know, it cooks fine, it yields fine. People will just educate the consumer and make them accept this. And our experience with educating consumers to do what we think they should do is very, very limited. I don't even try anymore. The second factor in this is that there's a very specific gatekeeper, the supermarket produce warehouseman. They accept the product. So when a truck comes up with vegetables for that supermarket, they go through and they decide which of it they're actually going to buy. If it's not good enough, they send it back with the farmer, and when it's a perishable product that has essentially no value. So the risk of delivering something that's not absolutely acceptable to the supermarket buyer is enormous. You just can't take that risk as a grower. With broccoli, I think they're especially finicky because broccoli is sort of a comfort food for a lot of people. And so our comfort zone on comfort foods is pretty narrow. We like familiarity with comfort foods. We like novelty in other areas, but we want our comfort foods to be very consistent. And so that's where getting the broccoli to stop doing these things, this one I put in there, it throws leaves out also. So what we've done with a rather large team of scientists and breeders is to do a lot of science, which I won't show you any details of. I'll say these are the developing flower buds, and the white stuff are genes turning on that control the enlargement of the flowers, which is the process we're looking at. And so we've taken the latest techniques in genomics, the genetic resources that are available in the germplasm collections worldwide, and in the commercial breeding programs. We work very closely with commercial breeders as well as the public breeders to bring all that to bear on developing a broccoli that will look normal even though the temperatures it's experienced are anything but normal based on its expectations. And so this is what we have now. That's actually a recently released commercial variety that was grown here last summer when it was very, very hot, and I took all those other pictures of other materials. So we've gotten to the point where we can have what looks like normal flower bud development. And, so we are working with the wilder material that was brought in that's part of the public programs. That's where the public programs are absolutely critical. They'll make crosses that wouldn't even be considered in the private industry. And then actually license that material to the commercial companies who then develop varieties and sell those varieties. That's what they're good at. So we've got a good team going to try to bring this out. So we're quite far along on solving this problem. There's a few challenges that still remain. So one of the key things for keeping customers is a year-round supply. So having broccoli coming from somewhere on the East Coast for the entire year is important. So that's where connecting Maine and Florida, with New York being a very large producer for summer and fall, is important. But the one most challenging season is the springtime, and so I'll show you, this is one of the more detailed things that's turning out to be an issue. So they look pretty similar, don't they? It turns out there's a critical difference. And that side branch is relatively short. This side branch is a little bit longer. It's just enough longer that it's a little bit wiggly. And when you pack all the broccoli together, all those side branches push against each other and wiggle and look ugly. That's not okay, because then when you put them out on the grocery store shelf, they're not attractive enough, and the staff will toss them. And this happens in the springtime when they've been growing under cold conditions, and then it starts to warm up and you start to harvest them. Then that branch starts to grow a little bit earlier than it would otherwise. Boy, is that a tiny detail. But it makes a difference between what you can sell and not sell. And there's another difference that shows up. If you look at the open spaces in the top of this head, you'll see that they're a little bit smaller than the open spaces in this one. And that means that you have to put 4 or 5 more of these heads in a box than you do of those. And again, they're less firm, and so they don't ship as well. So those are issues that we still need to deal with. We're discovering this spring issue is actually a fairly new one. We didn't know they were going to do that because nobody was growing it in that season before. And that's where working with the commercial breeders who have experience in adjusting with all of these subtle traits is coming in. So it looks very normal at the end, but behind it, we're really having a revolution in the amount of consumption, where the production is happening, how we're getting the broccoli to market from new areas, and also the science behind it, learning a whole lot about how flowers develop. And so we're hoping to see broccoli not develop additional traits like pretentiousness, but it's continuing to be one of the biggest comfort foods, and we want to make better broccoli locally available for as much of the East Coast as we can. Thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.